What is the best offer? Deciding and accepting an offer on a house can be super nerve-wracking. How do you know if you're picking the best one? What if you pick one and it falls through? Is there any way to predict how likely an offer is to make it to the closing table? Where's that crystal ball when you need it? Hi, I'm Lydia Rowe, a realtor here in Tip City, and on this channel, we like to talk about all things living in the Miami Valley of Ohio. Today, we're talking about how to choose the right offer when you're selling a house. Although I can't tell you the future, there are indeed some things that are important to look at when you're considering an offer. In fact, I'm going to talk about 5 parts of the purchase contract to pay special attention to when weighing offers that come in. These are things that are not the most obvious and things I've learned to look for after seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly. This will be particularly helpful if you have multiple offers in order to really compare apples to apples. However, even if you are just looking at one offer at a time, these tips will help you ask good questions and know what to look for when you're looking at an offer. Not only that, but I'm also going to reveal a very little known, extremely underutilized resource that helps level the playing field when it comes to comparing offers. And it's something you have to do before even listing. So you don't want to miss it. Let's get started. So everyone looks at price when looking at an offer, right? That's a no-brainer. Then you need to subtract any additional costs, like if the buyer asks for help with closing costs. Usually that's called seller concessions, or if they ask you to pay for their owner's title insurance or a home warranty, your net profit is going to be looking at the offer price minus anything additional that they ask you to pay for, minus what you still owe on your mortgage or your HELOC or second mortgage. So an offer of $300,000 and they want $500,000 towards closing is the same as an offer of $295,000 and they aren't asking for anything additional. However, there are other factors not every seller knows to consider, and that's what I want to get to now. Here's 5 factors to pay special attention to. Number 1, tax proration, short or long proration of taxes. Let's start with the basics. In Ohio, real estate taxes are collected twice a year in February and July, but here's the catch. The taxes billed in any given year are actually for the previous year. That means by the time you've paid your July bill, you're up to date, but only for last year's taxes. I know that can be confusing. When you sell your house, there's this thing called tax proration. Since taxes are a year behind, the seller gives the buyer a credit for future tax bills that the buyer will have to pay because they were the ones that lived in the house during those taxes. For example, we just wrapped up the year 2023. The February 2024 tax bill that came to homeowners was for the first half of 2023, and the one that will come in July 2024 will be to cover the last 6 months of taxes owed in 2023. Proration happens at closing and is essentially the seller giving the buyer a credit for those taxes that the buyer will now get the bill for in 2024. So a buyer is going to get a bill in July 2024 for the last 6 months of 2023, and they weren't in the house then, but they still are responsible to pay that bill. So it's prorated and credited at closing. You just need to make sure that you put that money aside as a buyer so that you can pay that bill when it comes. Now, to complicate the matter further, here in Ohio, there are 2 different ways to prorate. The 2 different proration methods are called short and long. Hang with me because this greatly affects the offers that come in. On the purchase contract, a buyer specifies whether short or long proration will be used at closing. If you have 2 identical offers, except one is using short proration and one is using long, this affects your bottom line and it can be significant depending on how much your yearly property taxes are. So what is the difference? The nutshell version is that long proration, you as a seller are responsible for all of the property taxes for the time period that you were in the home up until close. Usually when we talk about prorating taxes, this is the method used. It makes sense that whoever was in the house at the time is responsible for the taxes, right? Now with short proration, it's something that in certain counties became such a tradition that it's expected. And essentially the buyer is agreeing to pay for the last 6 months of taxes for the seller. So the seller is only responsible for the first 6 months of taxes. Now the seller will still give the buyer a credit, but it will be about half. I'll break it down a little bit more in a minute, but when you're calculating this, it usually turns out to be the difference to your bottom line of about half of the full year of taxes. It all depends on when your closing falls, so it's not something that I can tell you specifically until we have a closing date, but we can estimate pretty close for comparing offers. If you close in the first half of the year under short rate proration, the seller pays the February bill and gives a credit to the buyer from January 1st till the closing day. The buyer then takes on the July bill and all of that follow without a credit from the seller. For long proration, the seller covers that February bill plus gives a credit from the previous July 1st to the closing day. Again, the buyer is on the hook for the upcoming July bill and beyond, but they got that credit at closing that goes towards covering that July bill. And if you close in the second half of the year, the rules just flip accordingly. I know that it can be a little complicated. Keep in mind that there's no hard rule, but different counties in Ohio have their traditions. For example, Montgomery, Miami, and Warren usually go for short proration, while Clark, Champaign, and Greene, and a few others lean toward long proration. On a $300,000 home in Montgomery County, whose taxes are about $5,000 a year, if a buyer's offer includes short rate proration, that's an extra $2,500 you don't have to credit to them, essentially making their offer $2,500 stronger or better. Your realtor should be including tax proration in the net sheets they present to you, but at least now you know what that means. Number 2, earnest money. Earnest money does not affect your bottom line. Whether they offer $500 or $5,000, if the transaction closes, that goes towards the buyer's cost, not to you. However, it does show the amount of risk the buyer is willing to put into the transaction closing. Earnest money is a way for the buyer to tell you, the seller, that they really want the house and that they're not planning to back out without good reason. If someone isn't willing to put up earnest money, it could indicate that they aren't so sure about the house and they don't want to risk losing that if they decide to back out. When you're comparing offers and looking at earnest money, the higher that number, the stronger the offer. But you also want to look at the time that they have to turn it in. If they have 5 days to turn it in, that means your house could be off the market for 5 days. They change their mind and they aren't out a penny. Now, you could sue, of course, and that's not the only risk that they take because you are under contract, but who wants to do that, right? Side note on earnest money, you need to understand there is no automatic disbursement here in Ohio unless the sale closes. If it closes, it automatically gets applied to the buyers. If the contract terminates for any reason, whether it's a legit reason allowed for in the contract or whether it's a breach of contract situation, both the sellers and the buyers must sign a termination agreement specifying where that earnest money goes. If the buyer walks away due to any reason that's not a part of the contract contingencies, then they should release the earnest money to you, the sellers, as a payment for taking your house off of the market for that period of time. If the buyers walk away from the contract due to a defect found on inspection, or the house is not able to be insured, or there's an appraisal gap, and you aren't able to come to an agreement on how to handle those, then those are contingencies covered in the contract. And as long as they're within those timeframes of those contingencies, then you should release the earnest money back to them. However, sometimes it's not so cut and dry, and it might be best to split it halfway. Just know that if you don't both come to an agreement, no one gets it for 2 years. It's going to then default back to the buyer, I think. Don't quote me on that, or they might look at the contract and disperse accordingly, but I know no one gets it for 2 years. Also, that's never happened in any of my deals. It's very rare that there's an earnest money dispute, but it does happen sometimes. Next, let's look at number 3, inspection timeframes. Typical is between 7 and 14 days to complete inspections, meaning they need to have any inspections done that they want during that time frame, and they need to deliver a defect notice, which is where they either say that they're satisfied with the home as it is, or they ask for certain defect items to be repaired or addressed. Once you receive that defect notice, you have a specified amount of time specified on the contract, and this is negotiable before you sign it, to review the defect notice, get your own contractors out there to see if you want to get some quotes and things like that, and then you respond to their defect notice. Your response is either, no, we won't do anything, yes, we're going to make the repairs you requested, or something in between, like we'll do this and this, but not that, or we won't make repairs, but we'll give you $2,000 at closing, or we'll do a price reduction, or whatever. Now, once you have responded to their defect notice, they have a certain amount of time. Again, this is part of the contract that you sign and it's negotiable. They have a certain amount of time to consider and respond back to you. They'll either say, okay, let's move forward, or they have the option to walk away if their requests are not met. If you agree to all their requests, then you move out of the inspection period automatically and they don't actually need to respond back. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because these time frames in the contract matter. Typical response times I see are somewhere between 3 and 5 days. However, if they only give you like 1 or 2 days to respond, that might be super difficult to get a contractor out to give you a quote if they ask for repairs and they don't provide a quote for it. If they want 7 days to respond to your counteroffer, that's a super long time for you to have to wait and for your house to be off market if they decide to terminate. The 7 to 14 days in general is a big range. And if I'm representing the seller, I kind of want that shorter. And if I'm representing the buyer, I kind of want the longer. So just make sure that you look at this and it's a reasonable number for both sides. If a buyer asks for 14 days, you might want your agent to have a conversation and just make sure that the initial full house inspection would be in that first week and get that in writing on the contract. Sometimes I like to give that inspection a longer period of time in case we need to have specialists come in based on that initial inspection. Here's something you might not know and why these dates are important. If the timeline expires, you are automatically agreeing to things by default. The contract is written so that when those 7 to 14 days is up, if the buyer does not deliver a defect notice, they don't have the right to ask for any repairs. They're essentially stating that they're okay with the home as is by omission. If the buyers give you a defect notice within the time frame and you don't respond to it within the time frame specified, you by default are agreeing to everything that they asked for. So that's why it's important to understand this up front when you're looking at an offer and make sure that you're staying on top of those timelines once you're in contract. The fourth thing I want you to pay attention to, number 4, is financing. Not only the kind of financing, but also the kind of pre-approval. There's a difference between pre-approval and pre-qualification, and different lenders sometimes use these terms interchangeably, but generally pre-approval is stronger than pre-qualification. Pre-qualification could be based solely on a phone call without verifying anything. So things to ask the lender: was credit pulled? Do they have income documentation and bank statements verified? Next on financing, who is your lender? Your realtor should call the lender before you accept an offer. Will the lender give your realtor their cell phone number? Are they only reachable during bank hours? This can slow down the process and make last minute hiccups much more stressful and cause delays in closing. Again, if you're looking at multiple offers and one is with a lender who has a reputation for bending over backwards to get to the closing table, and another who is hard to work with and notorious for underwriters asking for last minute documentation and causing delays, or even not ultimately funding, you might consider an offer that's less to your bottom line but more likely to close. Financing is one of the biggest reasons for deals falling through, and having a solid pre-approval, a lender you can get a hold of who's already done the preliminary work of documenting income and pulling credit can help you avoid getting into a contract on a deal that will fall through. Obviously, this isn't foolproof, and even if a lender checks out and does it right, the buyer can still get disqualified as things come up in underwriting, but at least you do what you can on the front end to ensure that the financing is solid. Here's something you can really allow your realtor to help you with too. Not only vetting lenders, but also keeping you posted with up-to-date net sheets as the transaction unfolds. The initial net sheet will take into account the things that you know per the purchase contract. But after inspections and looking into repairs and all of that is going to affect the bottom line. It's too easy to get caught up in emotions instead of looking at the bottom line sometimes. You might not like the idea of paying any of the buyer's closing costs or providing them with a warranty, for example. But the bottom line is the bottom line. And as long as it's a good lender and they're pre-approved, sometimes saying yes to a deal where you're willing to help with closing costs gets you a buyer who's more flexible at inspections and who's more motivated to get the deal to the closing table. This market is tough. So if a buyer needs seller concessions to get into a house, they've likely lost a few bids due to this and will want to work with you to get the deal closed. I'm almost to that bonus I told you about, the underutilized tool that can level the playing field on offers, but let's talk about number 5 first. The last thing you might not think of to consider with offers is number 5, the buyer's agent. If you're comparing multiple offers and one comes from someone who has a reputation for being hard to work with and being pushy, they're not very flexible, and another comes from an agent with a reputation for win-win transactions who will do what it takes to get the deal to the closing, that can be a factor. Now, thankfully, the vast majority of agents in our area here in Miami Valley of Ohio are great to work with. Some are certainly more fun to work with than others, but that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at things that can actually affect whether this contract makes it to closing or not. And a buyer's agent does actually have a lot to do with that. The preference is for someone with great communication skills, who's good with smoothing things over when emotions get heightened, who can stay calm and collected when the hiccups arrive, because did I mention that hiccups always arrive? And also someone who's good at coming up with solutions and ideas for win-win compromises to save a deal. Now, there are some deals that need to be walked away from. I get that. It's not get to the closing table at all costs, but you wouldn't believe how many deals fall through because of something small that could have been managed better. And you wouldn't believe how many deals are saved because of a creative solution and a level head. So obviously you pick your realtor and you don't get a say in the buyer's realtor, but if you're comparing multiple offers, that can be a factor to consider. Again, lower offer that actually closes is better than a higher offer that doesn't make it. Also, if you have a buyer who isn't represented and wants to represent themselves, that can be a very difficult scenario for you as well as a seller. Buyer's agents really do help get a transaction to the closing table. It's not unusual for buyers to get cold feet, and if they aren't relying on a professional who can give them wisdom and guidance, they're more likely to make unreasonable requests or walk away. Side note, a buyer can also have a great agent and still get cold feet or make unreasonable requests. It's the buyer's agent's job to work for them, of course, and to represent their interests, not to control them. No one wants that. Okay, we made it to the end. And now, without further ado, what is the thing I've been alluding to that can help you the most in evaluating offers? That thing that you have to do on the front end before even listing your house. It is a pre-sale inspection. I'm actually a huge proponent of pre-sale inspection. I know some people shy away from this because if you have your house inspected and you find out things are wrong with it, you're required to disclose those things, and that's true. That is a risk that you take. However, in my opinion, the benefits outweigh the risk. Here's the thing. It's super rare that a buyer would buy a home without doing a full house inspection, and if you happened to get someone who waived inspection and they discover something later that wasn't disclosed, you could end up getting sued anyway. So whatever contract you accept will likely have an inspection, and that inspection is going to reveal things wrong with the house that maybe you were totally unaware of. By doing a pre-sale inspection, you significantly reduce your surprise factor. You know upfront what's going on, and you can disclose that information to potential buyers, get quotes for addressing the issues, and together with your realtor, you can have a much better assessment on your home's worth and price it accordingly. It's so disheartening to get a great offer and see that net sheet and the amount that you're going to walk away with at closing, only to be thrown for a loop after inspection and find out that the roof needs replaced and there might be a $10,000 foundation issue. You either have to cough up a lot of money for repairs or risk putting the house back on the market, knowing that you have to disclose those things that were discovered. And buyers will already wonder why the first deal didn't go through, and you'll most certainly need to drop your price. So wouldn't it just be nice to just know those things up front so that you can either address or price accordingly? But besides that, if that's not reason enough, there is something you might not have considered. When you're looking and evaluating offers, you have no idea what those buyers are going to be like in regards to negotiating inspection points. This is a huge factor, and for most sellers, it's completely unknowable. And here's something else you might not know. Some buyers and agents actually intend to renegotiate after inspection. So they inflate their price in order to win the contract and beat out the competition. And then they're going to be super nitpicky on the inspection or ask for things like a new HVAC system because the inspection showed it was old, or a new roof because the inspection showed it was at its end of life. There's no doubt an older HVAC or a roof affect value. But if you have a pre-sale inspection and you can disclose all of that information before any offers even come in, then the offers that you receive will have already factored these things into their offer, therefore leveling the playing field. Let me give you an example. Say you don't know the age of the roof or HVAC, but you know it works and you know that it has no leaks. You have 3 buyers make an offer. Buyer number 1 offers $300,000, and when they find out the roof and the HVAC is old, they're going to ask for a $20,000 price reduction. Buyer number 2 offered $290,000, but when they find out the roof and HVAC is old, they're just going to ask for a $750 warranty and a $5,000 price reduction. Buyer number 3 offered $290,000, but they're okay with the roof and the HVAC as is, and they won't ask for anything. You can see how taking the highest offer in this case actually wasn't your best choice. But how would you know? You can't know the future. You don't know how they're going to react. Or can you? If you have a pre-sale inspection and you disclose up front in your listing that the roof is old but it has no leaks and the HVAC system is old but it's been serviced and is functional, then when they make an offer, they're factoring that in already, or at least they should. Nothing is foolproof, of course, but you're much less likely having a buyer ask for a price reduction due to something already disclosed. For one buyer, they might not be bothered by those things, like buyer number 3. For another buyer, like buyer number 1, they might have not made an offer at all if they knew that those things were there. Or maybe they would have made a lower offer, but you want that. One caveat to this is just to make sure you know that all inspectors are different. And even if you do a pre-sale inspection, there might be some surprises that come up with a buyer's inspection. I had one where the buyer's inspector did a main drain scope, and even though my sellers had a pre-sale inspection, they didn't do that. And that became a big deal and something that the buyer wanted addressed. So again, you can't always avoid surprises or negotiation, but a pre-sale inspection does help with weeding out buyers who offer more just to get the deal, but have have no intention of paying that much. And it helps with that unknown factor of how different buyers react to the same information. Hopefully this has helped you go into your listing with confidence and prepared you to take a closer look at the offers that come in. If you're wondering whether it's worth it to make repairs ahead of time or just list your home as is, watch this video next. If you're in the Dayton, Ohio area and you need any help, my contact info is in the description. And if you are not in my area but need help finding a great realtor, scroll down to my Need a Referral link, fill out the referral form, and I will personally interview and find a great realtor for you in your area. I have a great network and it's constantly growing, so don't hesitate to reach out. As always, if you found this video helpful and you want to see more like it, share, like, subscribe, and if you have an idea for something you wish I'd cover, throw it in the comments, and who knows, I might make a video just for you.